A very warm welcome to This World Game Changers podcast, where your host, Paul D. Lowe, embraces many crucial conversations that compassionately contribute towards creating a better life and world. Paul's intention is very simple: to help get people's inspirational insights and motivational messages out into the world so others may benefit.
Hello, World Game Changers, and welcome to this podcast episode. And today we are going to be talking about angels with dirty faces, and more specifically, who am I? And to help us in that process is myself, obviously, Gary Clarke, and our question master, if that's even the right terminology to use, Keith Amoss, a good friend of mine from Luxembourg. Keith, without further ado, who am I?
If you don't know by now, Paul, then we're in a really difficult position, aren't we? Welcome, guys. We had a bit of technical problems, didn't we, to get this together. Zoom was playing up, so that's given us a bit of added tension, which is never bad when it comes to talking. It's raised the juices, as they say. Angels with dirty faces. Gary, I'd like to come to you first. What the heck is that title all about for a book?
All right, Keith. Nice to see you again. Well, it's like an idea from Paul, really. During COVID, we had lots of chats, lots of Zoom meetings, and obviously Paul's done a lot of books, 11, 12. I've been involved in books, and I met Paul Carlton Town 3 or 4 years ago at a fundraiser. Anyway, obviously we come from similar backgrounds in Nottingham. We're brought up sort of the wrong side of the tracks sometimes. It went all a bit pear-shaped when I left school, sort of thing. We had similar paths, growing up in Nottingham. Paul coming from Bestwood. I came from the inner city originally. Went a bit AWOL when I left school. There's a film, and we were just chatting, and Paul was saying, "You ever seen the James Cagney film, the old black and white one from the 30s, I think it was? Angels with Dirty Faces." I think it's about a gangster who obviously, was a bit of a naughty lad in his youth and that, and became a gangster. Yeah, I've seen it. I remember watching it years and years ago. And he had the idea, because we both had, sort of mixed fortunes or mixed adventures, in our youth. And he came up with the idea about doing a dual book together. How we changed our lives around, from being on the wrong side of the tracks to eventually coming out the other side. And it was Paul's idea. The title of Angels with Dirty Faces, I thought was brilliant.
So, well, I think you kind of got. I think some people listening will have got the idea. But Paul, I better quickly turn to you. And what I'd like to do with both of you is I'll spend a little bit of time, I think, asking you to introduce yourselves, because clearly we're talking to an audience here who's maybe listening to this for the first time. But Paul, I'm going to start with the same question to you. Why Angels with Dirty Faces?
Because when you go back to that iconic film, and I say it's iconic, not because of the nostalgia of, the good old days, but the tale of morality that underpins it. And Jimmy Cagney is growing up. I think it's Pat O'Brien, and they're kids. Pat O'Brien goes into the church, becomes a priest, and Cagney plays the gangster, and all his misdemeanors. And it's often the way with gangsters; they build up, or naughty boys and girls, they build up a bit of a cult following, a bit of hero worship. The dark side of life is glamorous. Actually, it's not. But there's that perception. So these kids are following Cagney and all his misdemeanors. And eventually the long arm of the law catches up with Jimmy Cagney and is sentenced to the chair, to death in the chair, which in those days was in a public place. So basically, to cut a long story short, Pat O'Brien, I think it's Pat O'Brien, the priest, from childhood says to Jimmy Cagney, what I want you to do just before your death, I want you to cry like a baby. like a coward in front of these kids. I want you to lose face, and I want you to show the world, and particularly these kids, that there's no glory and you're just a mere mortal, rather than this fearless somebody that's against the system, doesn't take any prisoners, blah, blah, blah. You've got a heart. You've got a soft heart that cares. And he said, I can't do it. I've spent my whole life on this track. I cannot and will not do it. So they're bringing him up from the condemned cell into the public place, the final few moments, so to speak. And it shows you all these people kind of baying for his blood, blah, blah, blah. But there's a half a dozen kids who are like, you know, Cagney's followers, if you like. And it's like, let him go, let him go, let him go. And they're crying because their hero's going to be executed. And Pat O'Brien looks across at Jimmy just to say, please, please do it. Cry, break down, show weakness. And Jimmy Cagney shakes his head as if to say, no, I can't. I'm going to go to my death true to myself. And then just literally in those last few seconds, Jimmy Cagney breaks down and starts crying and yelling, please, 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 no, 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 no. And these kids, it's like they're disgusted because their hero actually was not a hero anymore. But the morality of the story is obviously what Pat O'Brien, it dispelled all that darkness, that glorification of darkness, of violence, etc., etc., etc. So it was really when, you know, I was thinking and talking about, you know, Gary and I have had loads of chats over the last, you know, sort of few years around, you know, the good old days and how we found ourselves in certain circumstances and how we're in a different part of the game now, the game of life. We're in the second half and it's a completely different ball game. So it's this, I suppose, message really, Keith, to say that no matter what, you know, the first half of your life was like or whatever's gone off in the past, there's always room to change it in the second half.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, I think that's given everybody who's listening a really good idea of kind of the theme of what we're going to discuss now. Because, you know, just to set the scene, neither of you two guys would probably have crossed my path. And if you had crossed my path when I was younger, I wouldn't have had to not be wearing the wrong coloured scarf for the football team because I might have ended up on the wrong side of your fists. You both got reputations in the old days, as we would call it, I think 70s, probably 80s, but more 70s, of being hard men. And what you're, I think, going to help us to understand why you've moved from that as an early beginning to where you are now. So we have to start with where you came from. Gary, can you set the scene? If you were just explaining to someone who hadn't met you, what was your childhood like? What was going on in your world?
I was born in the inner city. Dad's from Cambridge. Met my mummy and now out in Nottingham. I lived in Sneinton, in the city part of Nottingham, up until I was about 5. Mum and Dad worked hard, really hard. Basically, I was brought up by my grandparents who lived on the next street, on the terraced, cobbled streets back in the day. They wanted to make a better life for themselves, so we bought. They got on the housing ladder and took a mortgage out in 1970. We moved over to a posher side of Nottingham, so I could go to better schooling. My early days, all my life was about football. Really, I was just football mad from as old as I can remember. Went to started school at an area called Clifton Primary School. Walked straight to the football team, and that was it. Really, all I was bothered about school's football and cricket. Really, sports. Left school. I like fashion. You know, I got into fashion probably in the 4th, 5th year at school. Started going to football games on my own, and I noticed the fashion at football matches. You know, and that intrigued me a lot. You know, I was more into the fashion, and then became the music, and then I started going away games on my own, visiting different cities, and I noticed, like, you know, football grounds in them days were a violent place, to be honest with you, and I was intrigued by it. Really, it fascinated me. I wasn't really scared about it. I wasn't really scared, which is funny. You know, I was fascinated by it. And then I left school. I got beaten up a couple of times at football games, to be honest with you. And then I started to sort of get in with a gang. And I thought, well, I was a big lad, and I stuck up for myself quite a bit. And I think that's where I fell off the rails a little bit. I think it was, I don't know, I was sort of attracted to the gang culture, and I got into a gang culture. And then in them days, there weren't many families went to football grounds. It was a male-orientated sport. And if you went to away games, you'd end up having to sort of defend yourself. And it was a free for all. You had to fight your way back to the train station half the time. You know what I mean? So that's where I probably started getting involved in the gang.
See, Gary, that's it. That's going to be an interesting thought in many people's minds as to why would you join a gang to fight? And they would be probably thinking, as I am, what are you getting from that?
Well, I mean, I didn't get a lot from it to start off with. I think it was just a case of if you didn't fight, you'd get beaten up. You had to defend yourself. You understand where I'm coming from? And then, you'd go to a different city. It was a big adventure then. Teams would come to your city and you defend your city. I know it's wrong. We all know it's wrong and you shouldn't have done it. But I think it's 1970s Britain. I think you've always had it in the 70s. Sorry, Britain in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You go back to the rocker days, and the mods and rockers, and then you go back to the telly boy days in the 50s. People have always defended their areas. It might not be another city. It might have been an area in the city where you live. I think it was just a British. Well, it's probably in America as well. It's probably not just Britain.
Of those days, and I'll just stick with you for a couple more questions, Gary. In those days, and the good news is I'm your vintage, right? So I know those days as well. You could go lots of different paths. You could be kind of a David Bowie hippie, sort of chilled, relaxed individual. You could be a motorbike, heavy rock, heavy metal, or football fan. But it seemed like for you, because of the football, that was a logical thing for you to move towards.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You could have took a different path. You could have took a peaceful path, a more, I don't know, less stressful path. We're not getting locked up at the weekend. I don't know. Casuals were just coming on the scene then. 70s, I was a normal football fan. I was a kid. I never got in trouble in 70s. I left school in 81. I didn't get in trouble till I left school. I did get beat up at a football game when I was at school. I got threatened several times when I started going 14, 15. And then I realised I could stick up for myself. I sort of fell into it. I love the fashion. And then, I don't know, we know it's wrong, but I just went the wrong way. I took the wrong path.
You got football, you got fashion, you've got mates. And if I could ask you this, it sounds like you also felt you were good at something, right?
Yeah, I think you belong. You got the feeling you belonged to something. I think it was the camaraderie. A lot of that, and and you just discovered women like that buzz as well. You was going to another city for the weekend. You know what he was going to wear. You come back. You tell the tales, and you end up in a nightclub or a late bar, and you had your groupies as well. It did attract the ladies as well. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So
I can see all the testosterone there. There's a big cloud of it around.
One big buzz. I got addicted to it. You know what I mean? It was more about the clothes and the days out.
So just to be clear, because I'll turn to Paul in a second, but just to be clear, did you feel like you were running away from something, and you had to prove yourself, or was it you just got swept up with it?
Well, I got swept away with it, but at school, I was never a violent person at school, but I got picked on a bit and got bullied, and I stuck up for myself, and I ended up having the odd fight towards the end of my school life, and then I noticed I could handle myself a bit more than others. You know what I mean? I stuck up for my mates, sort of thing as well.
You became a bit of an idol for some people.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so, because that's where I am you know, throughout my football life, you know, I become quite high up on the tree, you know, with the gang. If you know where I'm coming from.
So Gary, thanks for that. I've got to now turn to Paul. Slightly different for you, Paul, but the same sort of setting of the scene, really. What was childhood like for you, and can you take the listeners through it?
Yeah. So before we go into that, Keith, I want to dispel something that a well-known saying, cliche, call it what you will, about hard men. For me, they don't exist. There's no such thing. It's a fabrication. A man's hands might be quicker than another man's hands. It might take him longer to cry than another man. And, you know, the rule of the jungle necessitates that we give people labels. There's a pecking order. And, you know, that dictates that he's an hard man or whatever. And I'll say he, because we are talking from a culture back in the day where, you know, you would not talk about a female in that context. It was a hard man, not a hard person, a hard man. It's a total nonsense, because my take upon that, and it was at the time, even in the midst of being in that goldfish bowl, was if you lose a loved one, you cry. If you get cut, you bleed. You know, none of us are blocks of stone. And for me, certainly, the image that I put out there, and it was a conscious thing, I think they call it the mask, was exactly of that, stern-faced, don't come near me, don't mess with me, and don't, because I'm not letting you inside. What I was really saying, Keith, was please don't hurt me anymore, because I'm so emotionally hurt, vulnerable, and I'm dying inside. And it was this facade to keep people away, get in first, kill or be killed. Big boys don't cry. But I can tell you this, and I know this from own personal experience, and having spoken over the years to so many people that have wore the mask and the label of hard man, it's all a front. And be interesting to hear Gary's thoughts on that.
Well, I will, Paul, but I got the emotion there from you very, very strongly, and I think people would just want to know a little bit who don't know much about you, although you've got a great book out, which I've read and is available on audio, by the way, which you can plug. But people who don't know you, just a taster of what life was like for you growing up would help me understand.
Up until the age of 8, it was blissful. I lived with my grandma, my mother, and our little mongrel dog Rocky. It was blissful, absolute blissful. Extremely poor. You know, bread and jam was the order of the day, even for Sunday dinner, but blissfully happy. I had the love of 2 matriarchs and, you know, my playmate, you know, and we used to, Rocky was the defender as I got my football, you know, and I'd try and score the goal. And then my mother remarried. And then from it went downhill, and I had 6 years of pure hell. 6 years of hell, torture, violence at the hands of my stepfather, who I called the Beast. And so that, you know, I needed an identity, Keith. When we talk about who am I, I'd lost mine. I'd lost mine completely, because I'd gone from this fun-loving, easygoing kid that loved his mother, loved his grandma, loved his you know, Rocky, his beautiful dog, to just raw survival. And I had a choice to make, and I had that choice at 13 and a half, which was my first suicide attempt. And that was on the back of, and when we talk about identity, I attached myself to a certain football club known as Nottingham Forest. And
or to fans, Forest.
Yeah, or to fans Forest. And the belief that one day I would represent that football club and wear with pride that red shirt. Now, I did many, many years later, but not in the context that what I thought. So just be careful what you wish for on that one. So I had those 6 years, Keith, of those formative years. And in that time, I went through absolute hell. Absolute hell. And I just didn't want to live. But I found some solace in that identity, just as Gary found his on terraces with the crew and the boys, you know, the Forest boys. I found mine in a slightly different way, that, yeah, I'll play for the club. I'll represent that club, because they are my world. And when they lost 2 football matches in 74 to Newcastle in the FA Cup replay, and then Fulham, 48 hours later, I couldn't go. That was it. I felt betrayed. So we have to be so careful, I think, of the identity that we give ourselves, because mine was wrapped up in a football club. Yeah, so that was kind of in many respects, Keith, my formative years. Now, the damage that was done in those first 6 years has took me basically most of my life to unravel.
We're going to come through to that, and thank you both for your honesty and openness. And I can sense the emotion when you both speak. But Paul, your story, it shows me that you would be a very, very angry young man. Mm. Gary, I don't quite get that with you. I almost feel like you're finding something which gives you a buzz. Is that right? Either of you?
Yeah, I'll probably agree with that. You know, like I say, all I wanted to do at school was play football and cricket. I was quite decent at cricket, to be honest with you. But then I discovered drinking. You know, that's another probably wrong path I took. You know, I should have carried on with my cricket. It overlapped with football season, and I was very young, 15, 16. I'd be stuck out in the country, didn't drive, and you know, these guys were older than me. There was a couple of police officers played for the team as well, a couple of firemen. I just started getting in with the boys down Nottingham with a gang culture at football. I'd be stuck in some village, you know, 15, 20 miles outside of Nottingham. I had no way of getting back on Saturday night. Most of my mates are going down the city, having a drink by this time, enjoying themselves. I'd be stuck in the village pub listening to coppers trying to ask me questions about where the boys are meeting next Saturday at the football, you know, and the older guys used to tell them to leave me alone on a Saturday night. You know, I had this on a Saturday night in a village pub. You know, a couple of police officers asking me, you know, what's happening next week at the football. You know, were you meeting, you know, the first game of the season? I couldn't be doing with it, so I ended up packing up the cricket really, because I'd rather go down the football with the boys and get the buzz.
You both talked about. Oh no, sorry, Paul. You didn't talk about it, but I know it from your background. In both of your cases, drink played a major part, didn't it? Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think it does. You know, like my boy's good at football now. You know, he's only 12, coming on 13 this Christmas, and he's very good at football. I think once you know you're not going to make it professionally, 15, 16, I think I could have gone further in cricket, to be honest with you. But I was very good. But drink took hold of me then. I started drinking, you know, and that was the end of any chance of being a professional sportsman. So, yeah, drink did take a big turn in my life.
Is it something you've moved beyond?
Well, you know, I'm a weekend drinker. I'm a binge drinker. So, you know, I might not have a drink for 2 weeks, but then when I do go for a drink, you know, it'll be all day Saturday and all day Saturday night. But I'm a binge drinker. I've never been an alcoholic or anything.
Okay.
You know, I don't go out every night of the week, you know. So, but it was, you know, binge drinking isn't always good for you, is it?
No. Paul, not to go too deep, but just a few words.
In terms of drinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very astute, Keith, what you've picked up about the difference between Gary, because the irony is, as many as the parallels there are between our paths and our mindset and our hearts and everything, you know, I often look on Gary as a kindred spirit. The contradiction on that we have took. We've ended up in the same place after all these years. Our paths have crossed, but the paths that we took in many respects were very, very different. Yes, there is a commonality of words like violence, of Nottingham Forest, of drink, but my patterns in all those were completely different to Gary's. And the drink, I needed drink. I actually needed it. It was an addiction. And that was formed at my win at all costs, survive at all costs mentality, which was galvanized out of my childhood. You know, if you had a black cat, my cat would be blacker. And if yours was blacker, I had two cats. Anything you can do, you know, that addictive personality, that, you know, like I say, that win at all costs. I was living a total lie, and did for decades, a total lie. And it's not until more recent years that I've bottomed it all out. You know, I'm 13 years dry now, and I see things so much more clearly. But I actually needed alcohol to get by.
I want to ask you both a pretty difficult question here. You've both mentioned about your regrets and taking wrong paths and didn't like what you did. And so I'm going to ask you, Gary, this, which might be a difficult one for you. Have you forgiven yourself?
Yeah, I have really, because we know it. Like I said earlier, we know it was wrong, but I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't took that path. And I want to meet the people I met, and I've got friends all around the world through football, and the good people. There ain't many bad people. There's always bad apples in life, but I met some wonderful people through football. Got friends in Germany, Scotland, Wales, London, all over the world, really. And I want to meet these people if I hadn't took that path. I feel now I'm giving something back to football. I'm involved in grassroots football. I feel like I'm putting a bit back, and I can talk to people and say, why I went wrong. The only regret, I put my mum and dad up through a lot when I was young. Police knocking on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's a big regret in life. Putting my mum and dad through hell from 16 up till about late 30s, really. That's my big regret.
I mean, that's a positive, really positive response from you. And I know both of you turned your lives around, no question about that. But I think everybody has regrets in their life, don't they? But it's a question of whether you let that still drag on and whether you feel you're making amends now. Paul, what about you, Paul? Do you look back with regret or?
No, I don't. Absolutely not. It's been hard. It's been very hard. It's been desperate. It's been dark. But you know what? And not that we can, but I know it's cliched, I wouldn't change one single thing. And it's been devastating at times. The loss, the relationships that I've sabotaged, beautiful people I've pushed away because I had this deservedness. I'm not good enough. When you're told as a child you're a waste of space, you'll never be loved, and then your mother's stepping in to try and defend you because you're taking a beating while you're being told as a child what a load of crap you are. That sticks with you, and as much as you try and numb the pain with drink, it's just a temporary thing. I got to the stage with my drinking very early on in my early teen years where it just totally didn't touch me at all because the deep scars of that mental scarring, it was far too deep. So I don't believe in the regret. What we can do is get good people around us, get that arm around us and say, do you know what? Whatever life's thrown at you, it's okay. We go back to the top of this, Keith, where whatever we've been through, we've always got a second half. Go out to half time, reflect on the way you played the first half. Do you know what? You might have let a few goals in, but it don't matter because you can come out the second half. If life scored 4 goals against you, do you know what? You go out and score 5.
I think that's a great thing to remember, and having that drive is something that I think you're telling me you wouldn't have had you not gone through that situation. Neither of you. And let's lighten it a little bit. So, Gary, we're trying to find out the real you, and I would say that your music tastes probably haven't changed much, but I may be wrong. Give us an insight into your musical loves and hates.
No, you're probably pretty right, really, on music. Late 70s, I like Blondie, The Jam. I still like them to this day. Early 80s, obviously, I like Wham. I like Brian Ferry, Roxy Music. I came into the football casuals. I liked all that sort of music, Soft Cell. Then moving into the 90s. I like U2 as well, like them. Moving to the 90s, Oasis, The Verb, sort of Britpop like that. I like all that stuff, but I think my music taste to this day is still them. I mean, 80s is probably my favourite music scene. But after that, the 90s, I still like the 80s and 90s music better than anything to this day, to be honest with you.
And what about films and entertainment? What sticks in your mind? What were the best things you'd seen?
Yeah, I like a good film. I like documentaries more than anything, to be honest with you. I don't like soap operas. I don't watch much TV these days. I like a good documentary. I like history programs. I like travel programs like Great British Train Journeys and stuff like Marco Botello. I love watching stuff like that. I can watch that all night, stuff like that.
I absolutely love this because I'm imagining an 18-year-old Gary dressed in his casual clothes, which is for those who don't know, was like the skinheads were just the boots and the jeans and the braces, but the casuals were the far smoother, cleaner, shaven, a bit of brute behind the ears probably as well, Gary.
Yeah, it was been a mod, wasn't we?
If your younger self was to look at you now and you saying to me you like watching great train journeys on BBC Two, what was your thought?
I know you think I was mad, but I've always loved travelling. I've travelled the world with England football team, Nottingham Forest. I love trains. I love beautiful train journeys. And I just love watching documentaries on trains, travel. I could sit there all night and watch all that stuff. Because it's one of my pastimes has always been travelling. Perhaps that's why I became a football supporter as well. I love geography at school; it's one of my favourite subjects. I was pretty decent at geography, so I love a bit of history as well. I love listening to history.
Really interesting. That's fascinating. So, same for you, Paul. What about for you? Music and entertainment in terms of films and so on, books.
Well, I'm going to concentrate because we've done this kind of theme, Keith, in the next chapter 3. So I'm going to concentrate more on the film. And there's one that, there's a few actually, but there's one that really sticks in my mind, and it's Wuthering Heights. Because of the precarious nature of my upbringing and that lack of love, I crave things relating to love. And I can let this out, the vulnerability that I've got now, which is my strength. I can lay it out the bag. There is no way you would have got this answer a few years ago, because the mask and the guard was so tight that the Paul that you saw, you'd have got nowhere near close to him. Nowhere near close to him. But I could, and this is a beautiful conversation, Keith, not just for obviously from our own point of view, but to actually sort of send a message out to the world to say, do you know what? Whatever it is that you've got or haven't got, be brave enough to show it to the world. I'm not saying make yourself wide open so the world can trample all over you, but I kind of mentioned that in the context of, okay, so what is it that you really like, Paul? I had a saying for many, many, many years: only sad songs make you cry. I loved ballads, particularly Irish ballads, and that sadness, that melancholy nature, because that was a reflection of my emotions, of my world. The regrets that I did carry in a former life, the anger that I carried for many decades. Why has this always happened to me? Still in victim mode, poor old me, rather than, the place I sit in these days, which is totally the opposite. I used to love things like the Partridge Family. There's no way I was going to admit that to anybody. The guys would they just roll all over me with that kind of admission. You'd be called a sissy, or you'd weak, or whatever. But the real big film for me was Wuthering Heights, and that tale of passion, and and the particular version, because there's been many renditions of that, was with Ralph Fiennes and Charlotte Binoche. I mean, blimey, I could watch it over and over and over again.
Gosh, I'll reveal a couple of softer sides of both of you, I think. Who were your heroes, Gary? Who did you look up to? Who would you put as your, poster on the wall when you were an 18 or 20-year-old?
Films, actors. I like Steve McQueen. He's one of my favourite all-time actors. I loved all that sort of stuff he did. I like Frank Sinatra, as an actor as well as a singer. I used to love Frank's films. I love war films. I used to love the old war films. I like the older films better than the modern films, even to this day. I like same with Frank Sinatra. I loved his music as well. I really liked Frank in the 80s as well, and the 90s. I listened to a lot of his music, got a lot of his stuff. But actors wise, definitely Steve McQueen's my favourite all-time actor. Footballers, I love flair footballers. Footballers that played a large part in my early days. I was a bit of a Leeds fan at school as well. I love flair players like Tony Curry, who played for Sheffield United and Leeds. Then it was I like Glenn Hoddle, playing for Tottenham. Stan Bowles, I like them sort of players. Maverick players as well. Obviously John Robertson at Forest. I looked up to great footballers. England players, cricketers. I followed cricket in the 70s. I was a season ticket holder at Notts CC. I used to bunk off school and watch the test matches and get caught by the teachers. I like the great West Indian team, Viv Richards, Dennis Lilly, Australia. I watched all those players at Trent Bridge in the 70s. Ian Botham was one of my heroes as an England cricketer. So I looked up to cricketers as well, sporting heroes, you know what I mean?
That's a hell of a list, actually. If you could pick one, who was your hero? Big hero.
Big hero? In what? In sport or films or?
I don't mind. If I've given you the choice of just pick one person, you can have dinner with them if you like.
I think the Queen was the king of cool. So I'd go for Stevie Queen.
Okay, great, thanks. So Paul, same thing for you.
Well, I've got 3 words to say to Gary on that: Cool Hand Luke.
Paul Newman.
Was that Paul Newman? Well, do you know what? Okay. Well, that's a great intro because it shows how much or little I know about films. Yeah. Yeah. There was only one for me, and I'll go straight to the heart of the matter. There's 2 from a Forest point of view. John Robertson, in my humble opinion, but Robbo was kind of later on. The one person for me, and that he did come from the world of football. Well, there's 2 actually. One was Cloughie and the other one was George Best. For me, George Best, you can't compare, but I mean, I can remember him seeing when he played for Fulham, him and Rodney Marsh in the latter years, and they played down at the City Ground. Forest eventually won 3-0. I think this was into sort of mid-late 70s. I mean, Bestie had put weight on. They couldn't get the ball off him. And the way, the philosophy of life, people judged him on his hell raising, his drinking. But to quote Frank Sinatra, Bestie did it his way. And I think when we look in life, so long as you're not massively hurting anybody, or you're not hurting anybody, not even massively, do you know what? I think that's the greatest accolade we can say. I did it my way. The world might not agree with me, not like me, but as long as we're true to ourselves and we're not trampling over other people or causing pain, I think that's not a bad way to live life. Do it your way, but always be respectful of others.
Thank you for that, Paul. We've gone through your early years, your formative years, the sort of things that you used to get up to, both of you. How did you get to know each other, by the way?
As Gary alludes to, it was through Carlton Town, and I was comparing a Christmas lunch with one of the ex-Forest players, Paul Hart, and I met Gary there. I'd known Gary from, early Forest days, and I reminded him of maybe 20, 30 years previously, where I met him in a pub called Nottingham on a Saturday. Can't remember the game, and just said hello. It was in the Royal Children on Maid Marian way. I remember it. Like I say, it was a Saturday tea time, and we just spoke, and blah blah blah, and that was it. And as I say, met him all these years later, and we got talking, and the rest, as they say, is history. Because there was just some kind of, I like Gary's respect, and despite his image of Gary this, Gary that, his manners were impeccable, are impeccable. There was a gentleness about his spirit that I could relate to, that despite what the outside world would judge him as, to use your terminology again, Keith, a hard man or a colourful man or whatever, I actually saw way, way, way beyond that. And I resonated with him. I thought, do you know what? I want to get to know this guy even more. I like his spirit. And that was it, really.
Is there a sort of it takes one to know one sort of situation here?
There was for me, yeah, and I do agree with that. We can hide behind cliches all day long, but like does attract like. I can remember when I was on the height of my drinking, and I used to get in with a few of the old travelling lads, the Irish travelling lads, and one of them said to me the one day, he said, a drinker will always find a drinker. And that's a great metaphor for life. Like attracts like.
Gary, what's your recollections of meeting Paul?
Yeah, Carlton Town with the Paul Hart dinner fundraiser. As it happens, we do one every Christmas at Carlton. I've been going for 8, 9 years, 10 years now. That's why I've become good friends with the club. And I think it was probably 3, 4 years ago, Paul. And just before COVID struck, and obviously I have a table every year, and Paul was doing the comparing that day. Obviously, Mick, the guy, the club chairman, normally does it, and he had a rest this year, and he's a good friend of Paul's. He's obviously we're mutual friends, and Paul did the comparing that day, and I thought it was very good. He, obviously, because he knows Paul Arks, he worked with him at Forest, and he was selling his books, one of his books anyway that day. I think I bought a couple. I went over and bought a couple, and then obviously Paul came over towards the end of the function and gave me his business card and says, "Oh, I'd like to have a chat with you. Privately, I live in Spain now. I'm based in Spain." That's where we got sort of talking, really.
Okay, cool. Gary, one thing I've spectacularly failed to mention is that you have this nickname, Boatsy.
Yeah.
So tell us, how did you get that?
Quite a funny tale. I actually told people about this on Sunday at my lad's football match, because obviously I've just done a documentary for Channel 4, and it comes up obviously on the screen, Gary Boatsy Clarke. So Charlie's football parents wanted to know where's the nickname come from. So I'm actually telling this last Sunday morning on a field in the middle of Derbyshire. What it was, obviously the fashion and everything. Very early, I think I was 16 at the time. We used to wear tight faded jeans and various types of trainers, and these new trainers come on the market called Puma GV Lass, with having sort of drain pipe jeans, and these had a big sole. And I've always had big feet anyway. I'm size 11 now, but I think I had size 11 feet at 13, 14. They had bigger, and I remember walking in the pub that Saturday lunchtime. Forest were playing somebody or other. I walked in the pub with these new trainers on, and somebody shouts out, flipping out, they stood out, and they looked like boats. And then somebody says, just nickname me Boatsy. It's just stuck ever since. I've had that nickname since I was 16.
Amazing. Paul, did you have a nickname of anything that you can remember, one that you liked or anyone that you avoided?
I did, but I'm not going to repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you into a few fights, did it, when people called you it or something
There
like
was
that?
a lot of confusion. I got myself into it because, as you've alluded to, I was a very, very, very angry young man at an early age. I was very confused around my identity, because of this. We got brought up in the middle of Bestwood Estate. There was a lot of Irish families. I was very, very drawn to the Irish fraternity, very drawn. And the English lads used to, well, you're just a paddy. And the Irish lads didn't like it because I had anything to do with the English. And this carried on for quite a lot. So when we talk about identity, I grew up not only just angry, but very confused as well. And that, I think, I've always been a loner because I refused to take sides. I can remember going into Catholic churches, and the priest asking me, "Are you Catholic?" and rearing up on him. It's none of your business what I am. Don't try and label me. I've got a heart. That's all you need to know. Being very deep, well, not defensive, but I think that, and this is why I've got such strong sort of views on it even now, Keith, because people try and put you in pigeonholes and boxes. He's this, she's that. He's Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, black, white, pink, gay, straight, rich, poor, and it just creates so much confusion and division in life. And that's why I've got strong views on that particular thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving you forward, you both had families, children, wives, sorted lifestyles, shall we say, in your middle years. Is that when everything changed for you? Is that when you thought, I can't keep going down the path I've been down? Was it maturity, just getting older? Was that what changed you, or was something else that really moved you to do something different with your lives? I'll start with you, Paul.
No, because I still had deep-rooted self-hate and deservedness issues, and I actually sabotaged. I mean, when I look at the amazing, beautiful women, and I mean beautiful inwardly as well as outwardly, amazing, that stuck by me through thick and thin. But I, not just but with with the family, the women folk in my life, but people that got really close to me. Gary and I, as a friendship, wouldn't survive these days, in those days, because I'd have to push him away. I'd have to sabotage the relationship, thinking I'm getting too close to this guy. I love him. I respect him. I couldn't cope with that. It's like, no, okay, do you know what? It's easier to throw it out the window. So I'd start a fight. In the old days, I would have started a fight with him. just to break the friendship, which was crazy because, that's one of the big lessons learned around, in this world. When you find good people, you invest in them, you stick by them through thick and thin. But that, I suppose, is emotional maturity. It comes with age.
Well, it's revealing, isn't it? How do you feel when you hear him say that, Gary?
Yeah, I find it a bit strange, really. Never really been like that, to be honest with you. I've always kept my mates close to me, and I value friendships even when I was younger. I've had 1 or 2 fallouts with mates over the years. Don't get me wrong, you all do that. That's part of life, isn't it? I had fights with mates at school, fights with mates when I've joined the Forest lads. There's always something happens over a girl or something. Especially when you're younger. You fight over the ladies sometimes, don't you? You get a bit jealous. I have had tips and fallouts with mates over the years. I don't think I keep my mates close to me these days, like Paul says. I've got a close circle of friends these days. I don't hang around in large groups. I don't hang around in gangs. I've got I could probably count my mates on two hands now. Probably I get on probably with my mates from different cities and different countries. To be honest with you, because that's why we don't see each other all the time. You know what I mean? I think that's a good friendship when you don't see each other every week in, week out. But I've got a close circle of friends in Nottingham. I work with my friends, so I keep my friends close to me. Yeah, I find it a bit weird that Paul says that, to be honest with you. So,
when you hear that, I mean, that clearly is from the heart from Paul, and it took a lot of soul searching and rediscovery of what life was all about. I think, Paul. For you, though, Gary, what I'm picking up is more. It was more kind of I'm putting that word out there again, maturity. It's like you sort of thought, okay, I'm beyond that now. I've got the family. I've got,
Yeah.
Is that right?
I mean, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I've been married twice. My first wife, I was only about 29. She was 21. But I was still heavily involved in the football, gang violence and football violence. I think that ruined the first marriage. That definitely ruined the first marriage. Because when she divorced me, back in the day, you got 5 reasons for unreasonable behaviour. Nottingham Forest was mentioned 3 times in the 5 points.
Wow.
Obviously, I'm matured a lot over the years. My second wife, I married in, I think, 2011. We had Charlie in 2000 and New Year's Eve 2009, 2010. Having a family certainly changed my life because I got out of the football scene probably 2004, and I was determined to stay away from it. I had a slight setback in 2006 where I had a major court trial. I was innocent anyway and got found not guilty in Crown Court. I could have easily gone the opposite way again. Then I met my second wife and we had Charlie. So that did guide me in the right direction. You know what I mean? So
and Paul, also you've had relationships and children as well, and this is something about seeing this part of your own genes sort of looking back at you, and a responsibility that comes with it that perhaps you don't have when you're younger, obviously. One thing we haven't touched upon is that we sort of skirted around the fact that you both difficult childhoods went into various situations, but for a lot of your friends, a lot of other people that were sat in the classroom with you at the time, they're studying to do exams and studying to go on to do something in the world of work. So what was going on for you two academically at that time? And maybe you can take it forward to where are you now in terms of studies and what you've done. Let's start with you, Paul.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I had unfinished business. There was a forest manager called Billy Davis in more recent times, and he coined the phrase unfinished business at Forest. He'd come back for a second stint. I had unfinished business because at an early age, I was actually labelled as a child genius. Ooh. But because of the turbulence that went off in my world, I mean, that distraction was, became all dominant. And I was into, as I say, raw survival, to the point where all I wanted was a football. And that was it, the football and, just surviving on the streets. And I mean, literally on the streets, on park benches at an early age, drinking, going with the Irish boys, drinking poutine and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, for me.
So school was way out. School was nothing. You didn't want to study anything.
Well, there was one lesson I used to turn up for. I went to an all-boys grammar school, which was very kind of ex-military, steeped in tradition. It's not there now, called High Pavement, from 1971 till 1976. Let me rephrase that. I was registered there. My attendance was spasmodic, to say the least. But I used to turn up for one lesson, and that was French. And the reason I turned up was the lady that took us for French. She showed me genuine compassion. She was really interested in why my world was falling apart. And she used to sit me down and, kind of talk to me. And I'd really open up to her. And because she showed me that investment of emotion, I wanted to pay that back.
Gosh.
Rather than the male masters that basically jump when you're told to. How aye, sir? What now, sir? And I didn't do any of that. I used to turn up in like a pair of Doc Martens and Levi jeans, when I did. Which in those days, in early 70s,
you had to have a uniform, presumably.
Very much a uniform, yeah. And I didn't. I just, what was the old kind of Jimmy Dean? I was a rebel with. I don't know if I had a cause, but I was certainly a rebel because I could not stand authority, and certainly not authority from males, because the authority that I'd had in childhood from my stepfather, that broke me completely. And it's like I was going to rebel. Even now, and people start dictating particularly to others, I'm in there defending it. As much as we do that inner work and that personal development, and we like to think we're sorted, we still have those triggers that say, do you know what? That is downright wrong what you're doing. That's abuse and that's bullying. And that still runs deep with me when I see people being abused and but I used to go to the French lessons, and I actually come first in the mocks, in the exams, in everything, which is unheard of because I come last in everything else because I just didn't turn up and I wasn't interested and I wouldn't be bullied or dictated to.
Très bien, Paul. Excellent.
But just to bring in before you hand back to Gary, just to bring in the unfinished business, for me, I left school with barely anything, which for a so-called child genius, and I don't do the labels thing, was like unthinkable. But in many, many years later, I was like a real coiled spring. Okay, I'll show you what I'm made of. So I went in, I did a foundation year, then I got my HND, then I got my teaching degree, then I got my master's degree, and then I got my first year of my doctorate. And by that time, Keith, I'd been in the academic circle. We've spoke about this privately, 11 years. And I passed the first year of my doctorate, and the dean had us in at the end of the first year, and he said to me, you've passed, old boy, but it's academic tosh. They were his exact words. It's academic tosh. By then, my attitude is this is a blueprint to help humanity. The fact that there's full stops out the place or wrong words used, I don't really care because there's people dying on the street. So put your academic and your doctorate where the sun don't shine because I'm off. And that was in 2003. And I had the opportunity, as you know, to pick that up recently and made the decision, actually, I'm not picking it up. That was a long time ago.
But I still think you're being very modest as to what you've achieved. Academically, it's pretty impressive, Paul. And coming from that background, you could easily have not done anything further, but you have. Gary.
Yeah,
what was school like? Did you just think, what the hell, not doing this, or were you quite
a
good student?
I was pretty bang average at school, to be honest with you. I could have done better. I've still got my school report somewhere about anyway, and most of it says don't concentrate, could do better. He's got talent, but he just can't be bothered, sort of thing. All I want to do is play football and cricket at school. I couldn't wait to leave school, to be honest with you. And I could have done O-level art, geography, and woodwork, but I didn't want to stay on. It meant staying on another few weeks, and I just had GCSEs. I got grade 2s and all those. Really should have got grade 1 equivalent to an O-level. I just couldn't wait to get out of school, really, to be honest with you. I do believe you learn more by travelling in life eventually, but like you say, I couldn't wait to get out of school. I didn't really like it. So as I say in my school reports, should have tried harder, should have done better.
Is it something you've stopped now, or would you ever think to go back? Because in a way, it's never been as good as it is now in terms of what you can do in the way of studies.
I know. I've thought about it. I've thought about doing stuff like that, but I just haven't got the time. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, I just haven't got the time.
Yeah.
Paul's gone back and done it, answer, which I think is great credit to him. I think he's done really well. He's obviously a very clever person. You know, I learn off Paul every day. So, yeah, fair play to Paul, but I just haven't got the time.
Yeah, the only thing I learned from Paul is how not to work the Zoom. But anyway,
I've got. I know we've got. I keep getting updates. I think we've got somebody else. We've got another one after this somewhere.
Look, we're sort of rambled through, and thanks both for your honesty and what you've said. And there's no judgment in anything at all. It's just you telling people, you know, about your lives, and it's really interesting. Both of you, fascinating lives. But I want to sort of get into the meat of the thing as to what you're both doing now, because you're definitely both giving back. You're really exciting as to what you're doing. So, Gary, tell us more about this grassroots football.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. Paul took me on board his charity during COVID. He's got World Game Changers, and he's always run charities over the years, hasn't he? And I got to know a lot about Paul during COVID. We did a lot of Zoom interviews. I did pieces for a book of his. And obviously, I was still doing bits for Carlton Town. I've always gave to Carlton Town. I like to think I'm a giver rather than a taker, especially later on in life. And I've always donated a lot of stuff to Carlton Town. And during COVID, you couldn't go to watch league football, and you could go and watch long league football when they started opening it up a bit. So obviously we went down to Carlton Town a lot. We quite enjoyed grassroots football. It attracted a lot of new fans. You can drink side of the pitch. You know, it's a lot more relaxed. And one of the commercial manager of Carlton Town died during COVID, so there was a couple of vacancies at the club. It started off really by we did a big charity football match with Paul, World Game Changers and Carlton Town Football Club, and it was the first event after the world lockdown really. And I think we raised about £16,000, didn't we, Paul? We had about 700 people turn up to this event. And obviously, what I've been doing with the charity and what I've been doing, Mick Garton, the chairman of Carlton Town, seen, you know, I've got a lot of contacts, and he's seen I can make money. You know, I'm good at fundraising. I think Paul's seen that as well. And obviously, there was a vacancy on the board. We left it a bit out of respect to the families of Brian, Danette, and he invited me on the committee. He says, "Would you like to come on board as a commercial and fundraising marketing manager?" I felt humbled, actually. You know what I mean? Especially when we passed history of football and everything. I thought was the opportunity to give something back to football here. You know what I mean? And to grassroots football, where everybody starts. And I'm loving it. Right. Paul helps the club out a lot as well with World Game Changers. We've got a great friendship there as well. I'm also a patron to World Game Changers still. You know, I'm still helping Paul with little bits here and there, although I haven't got so much time as what I used to have, especially during COVID when you had all the time in the world on your hands. You know what I mean?
Love it. Thanks, Gary. Paul, what are you giving back?
Don't know, really. What would you like me to give back? Name your price. I'll meet it. I think from, you know, how we play the game of life, when we talk about mastering the game of life, we never master it, but we learn to play the game a lot better to the point where it serves us. And I mentioned that to answer your question, Keith, in the context of what am I giving back? I look at the 6 human needs: the need for certainty, the need for variety, the need for significance, you know, the need for love and connection. The 5th one, the need for growth. But ultimately, the biggest human need is the need for contribution. Because even in my darkest hours as a child, I was always, you know, for me, my heart was naturally geared towards helping others. And, you know, that's grown over the years through experience. I've took the learning out of painful things and moved on from it. And part of my giving back now, Keith, is to speak to people, try and help the best way I can in any capacity at all, you know, so that they don't have to go through the pain that certainly I went through. And pain doesn't even touch it, because there's so much darkness and desperation, as I've said. So anything that I do really is kind of that giving back. Try and put myself in that person's shoes. What's he or she going through? What can I do here? You know, it's all very easy to start saying, oh, we're doing really big things. And there's some massive, massive initiatives that's being formulated with World Game Changers. But you know what? It's the real, simple, granular, minute things in life that we take for granted that make massive differences. I just want to tell a little story about that. Most people know of Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey had a mentor at the time, she's passed now, called Maya Angelou. And Oprah come in the one day to Maya Angelou, a mentor, and she said, Maya, she said, I've got this great legacy thing. All these new schools in Africa for girls that are being abused. It's going to be the greatest legacy ever. We're going to save all these girls from, sex abuse, etc., etc., etc. And Maya, the wise, quite old sage that she was, she just shook her head and she said, no, you're not. That's not your greatest legacy. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Have you not seen the numbers? Have you not seen the plans? And Maya, she said, Oprah, that is not your greatest legacy. You don't know what your legacy is. The legacy that you will leave is that stranger that you smiled at in the shop this morning, that little old lady that you carried the bag to the bus stop, or whatever. Just that little small act of random kindness. That is your greatest legacy. And you know what, Keith? I think that's a phenomenal lesson for us all to learn, because we concentrate on the big stuff, don't we? The social media. Oh, look at this, the hype. No, for me, the game of life is a very, very, very simple game, but we've kind of lost our way as humanity. And to me, to quote John Major from the 80s, it's time to take it back to basics and concentrate on the little small things in life that really do matter.
Thank you, Paul. I think that will resonate with a lot of people. Guys, it's about time to think about wrapping up. I'm going to give you just a little a couple of sentences here, because what I think I've seen and what I've heard from you both was really from the heart, and I love it. I know that you're recalling a lot of these things with a bit of pain as well as you talked about it, and it's come across. I could feel the emotion, but I'm also happy at the way that you both have shown, I think, to me listening, and to others who will listen, that there is a way through these things, and a lot of good can come out of it. No regrets, so to speak. There's a song there somewhere. No regrets, but you can move forward. You can do some really good things with your life. And I suppose I just want to say, since this is about angels with dirty faces, and now you're both angels, well, looking at you, I'm not quite sure that's true, but still. What's one piece of advice? I know this is a trick you normally pull on people, but what's one piece of advice that you would give to anyone listening about how to handle the difficulties they're facing in life at the moment? Gary?
Well, I think whatever place you are in life, I think never give up. You could be, obviously I've been at the bottom. I've been sat in a prison cell. My family didn't know where I was. I didn't tell me mum and dad. I had to make a phone call on the wing. I had a big court case in Newcastle, and obviously I thought I might walk up until the very end. So I didn't want my mum and dad to go through the pain of months and months of this happening. I kept it from them, and obviously the worst happened. I got sent to Durham jail, and I had to make this phone call on the wing, obviously to tell them where I was. That's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I was really at the bottom, as low as I could go. I just believe that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Don't never give up. You can turn it round, no matter how low you go. So
brilliant. Thank you, Gary. Okay, Paul, last words from you then.
It's simple, really, and I've alluded to it. I mean, there's so many answers I could give to this, but to keep it in a football angle and mastering the game of life, you might be 4-0 down at half time, but until that final whistle's gone, you're never out the game. Never out the game.
Great. Lovely to speak to you both. Paul, I'll let you say a few final words, but my thanks to you for your time today. Really appreciated it. And obviously all the best of luck with the book.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Gary.
Keith, thanks a lot.
And listeners, I think there's not much to sign off with there. I mean, we could wax lyrical about X or Y or Z or A or B or C, but I'm just going to sign off very simply by the way I always do. But before I do that, I kind of just want to, elaborate and say that with this Angels with Dirty Faces, we've all got things in our skeletons in our cupboard. We've got all the things that we're maybe not quite so proud about. Learn to drop the mask a bit and forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for whatever misdemeanors. Drop the self-judgment, and just learn to play the game in a different spirit, because it'll bounce back on you. And I sign off on that note by saying, remember, the game's changing, and ask yourself, how will you respond?
Thanks very much for listening to this World Game Changers podcast episode. Hopefully you found it interesting and helpful. Drop a line to Paul at worldgamechangers.org with any thoughts or questions you may have, and he'll be more than happy to respond. Remember, the world's changing. How will you respond?